Good evening. I'm George Galloway, and I'm here on behalf of the Alliance for Unity. This is our second broadcast. Our first broadcast received 100,000 viewers, and we were only a couple of days old, really, at that stage. So I'm hoping that that phenomenal number will be beaten this evening, certainly over the course of the next week. I won't be doing next week's broadcast. One of our candidates will be doing that. So this is the last opportunity I'll have for a couple of weeks at least to bring you up to speed with how the Alliance for Unity is doing. As some of you know, my wife is imminently about to give birth. I'm not taking paternity leave or anything fancy or modern like that, but I think I probably ought to hand over the reins of the broadcasting, at least, to someone else. Now, we are appearing on many platforms right now, live on my Facebook, on my YouTube channel, on the Alliance for Unity's Twitter feed, and heaven knows where else. But multiple platforms, same message. Now, I'd probably best deal with some housekeeping points first. In 15 days, we have grown absolutely phenomenally. There can be no political organization or alliance anywhere in the country that is growing as fast as we are. And that vindicates, I think, the decision to launch the alliance, because we perceived that what wasn't working, and I'll come back to that theme later. And as the great mind Albert Einstein said, the repeatedly doing the same thing and expecting a different result is a sure sign of madness. And I want to drive that point home this evening, because I'm seeing on our Twitter feed some actual madness that is coming from the gatekeepers of the other unionist parties, anxious to guard their patch. But I'll come back to that. We have grown phenomenally because there was a need for us, because there was a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does politics. We have stepped in to try and fill that vacuum, and all the early signs are very positive indeed. We are inundated, literally inundated, with emails and messages of all kinds. We have many hundreds of people keen to be candidates, and we've selected some candidates that I'll turn to in a minute. But we are now catching up with some of the things that are basic and obvious for a political organization. Young James Giles is now working as our organizer, and you'll be hearing from him and seeing him, I'm sure. And he's responsible for the fact that we now have a telephone number. Don't worry about writing this down, because it will be on our website. But the number is 01389 504 534. We've also got office space in Ayr. I won't give out the address, just in case any headbangers want to come down and shout abuse at us. But it's in Ayr, and that's where our correspondence will go to, paper correspondence, I mean. We now have an email address that is contact@Alliance for Unity, Alliance number 4 Unity.uk. And we have a website. It's rudimentary. It's only going live right now, this minute, and it's alliance4unity.uk. As I said, we have chosen some candidates and are close to choosing others. We have many to choose from, but we still have vacancies in some key areas. So if you are watching this and are interested in standing as a candidate, then please get in touch with us. Professor Alan Sked of the London School of Economics will be doing the broadcast next week. So broadcast number 3 will be delivered by Professor Alan Sked, and he is our lead candidate in the Highlands and Islands constituency. He is the man that founded UKIP. Most people think that Nigel Farage founded UKIP, but he didn't. Professor Sked did. And we like to think he is the intellectual and kind face of the United Kingdom Independence Party. In that sense, you could say he's the father of Brexit. But you don't have to have supported Brexit to support the Alliance for Unity. All these things have to be unpacked now. We have to concentrate on the battle we're in now, not on the last war. And we have many candidates and many people around the Alliance who were Remainers, and some of them still are. So Professor Alan Sked is our lead candidate in the Highlands and Islands, and will be presenting next week's broadcast. Because economics is one of the main fields that we intend to fight upon, because the economic illiteracy and numeracy of the SNP has reached absolutely staggering heights. As any of you who've watched the videos of my altercations with a couple of Scottish nationalists on economics over recent weeks on my mother of all talk shows already knows. But even inside the Parliament, even inside the administration in Scotland, there are people who don't seem to know their backside from their elbow when it comes to economics and finance. And I will come back to that issue later. Charlotte Morley is our lead candidate in Lothian. She is an Edinburgh lawyer, criminal lawyer, of very great promise. A young woman, expecting her first child actually at the moment. She is a tremendously important legal figure for us, because she is going to be shadowing Hamza Yusuf, the world's worst, definitely the world's worst finance justice secretary. I can't think of a worse one. Maybe Donald Trump's administration has one, but no one in Europe has got a justice secretary who knows nothing about the law, and yet who regularly goes out to bat for ever weirder, newer schemes like the hate crimes bill, which we are opposing root and branch. And Charlotte Morley is the person to lead for us on that. And she is going to be a very formidable opponent to the separatists in Edinburgh, in the Lothians. Now, of course, we still have other candidates to appoint there. And if you're in the north east of Scotland, we have, this is wrongly done. Yes, we have Arthur Keith. Arthur Keith is a former Black Watch Sergeant Major. He runs a security company called Red Hackle in Dundee. He too is another formidable character, tremendously charismatic, and is ready to fight in what is often called Indy City. But if it is Indy City, then it has sufficient problems to call into question the wisdom of being Indy City. And Arthur will be a great fighter for us there. A brave man, a man who was a soldier and continues to bear the hallmarks of a soldier, and one of those is courage. And he's not going to be any shrinking violet when it comes to combating the SNP in the northeast of Scotland. In South Scotland, we have three candidates. I'm the number one candidate. Jamie Blackett is the number two candidate, and Jean Matheson is the number three candidate. Jamie, as you may already know from our Twitter feed, is a gentleman, a farmer, a landowner, a former distinguished soldier, a writer in the Daily Telegraph, in Country Life, in the Spectator, a lad o' perts, as they would say in Scotland, a man with many, many strings to his bow, a man who'd make a terrifically good minister in the government of national unity that we hope will follow these elections in May. And Jamie is the deputy leader of the Alliance for Unity. In Glasgow, Ricky Morton is the first candidate that we have chosen there. So 6 vacancies in Glasgow. And David Griffiths, of course, in West Scotland, who's already off and running and making an impact in the parts of the Scottish population that he can easily reach, and with a formidable, powerful voice. He is a businessman. He is tremendously articulate and an extremely acute political analyst. And David has calculated that we stand a very good chance in West Scotland of winning 2 of the seats there in that region. I said I wouldn't give you the address in air, but I'm told by James that I should. It's Suite 2, S-U-I-T-E, Suite 2, Fullerton House, 4 Fullerton Street, Ayr, KA71UB. So that's the housekeeping out of the way. We're off and running. I should tell you that all of this has been achieved at precisely nil cost, 0. We've spent 0, which is just as well because we've raised 0. But we are now going to have to get fundraising, and our treasurer, a chartered accountant no less, in Scotland, will be publishing details very soon on the website and through social media as to how people can give. There'll be multiple ways that you can give, and it'll be safe in the hands of our treasurer, a chartered accountant no less. Now, let me turn to the case that we are trying to make to the people. I summed it up in a way in a tweet I put out earlier today that Bannockburn was a battle fought between 2 French-speaking kings with Scottish people fighting on either side. Mel Gibson is an Australian and Braveheart is fiction. Now, you might think that's facile, if true, but it isn't, because we intend to take the fight to our opponents, not just on the issue of pounds, shillings, and pence, although they are, of course, very important. Everybody knows that about us, the Scots. We know how hard it is to make a penny, and so we don't and the economy will be a major part of our battle plan. But we also intend to confront the separatists ideologically. We don't intend just to criticize the SNP, although every day brings new reasons to do so. Neither do we intend only to attack the idea of separatism. We intend to make the positive case for Britain. Britain's a good country. It's a better country than many. It is a country with many things that we have achieved and that would be at risk on both sides of the border if the country was to be severed, if it was to be partitioned. And we don't hold, we partition, if you get my drift. We think a small island of English-speaking people should stay together, and we will be making the positive case for that. Now, they talk a lot about Bannockburn and Robert the Bruce and Braveheart and all the rest, but they seldom have anything to say about a more recent war, except when their extreme lunatic fringe, David Llewellyn and people like him, are promising to come down to the cenotaph and defecate upon it. I'm not making that up. That's what he said on Twitter. He actually said that. Let's all go down to the cenotaph and dump on the cenotaph. They don't like to talk about the war, and they don't like me talking about it, even though it's so recent. There are some people watching this that were in it. That's right. And the reason for that is the birth of the SNP was arrived through hatred of Britain. There isn't any getting away from that. It wasn't love of Scotland, it was hatred of Britain. And the first leaders of the SNP hated Britain so much that they actively collaborated in the 1930s with the Nazis, with the Nazi embassy in London, and with special emissaries of Hitler himself, Gibb and Donaldson, the latter having to be interned during the war as a danger to the national security of all of us. MacDiarmid, the poet laureate of the SNP, the man that if we had a separate country would be elevated to God knows what kind of panoply. Maybe whole cities would be called after him. He wrote a Scottish plan for fascism. He wrote in his poetry books that London was burning, I don't care. Now, this is history, though it's not as ancient history as Bannockburn, but it is history with a purpose. Because although they like to pretend, although less and less like to pretend, that their nationalism is civic and joyous, the truth is it's ugly and nasty. And nationalism almost always is vicious and nasty because it seeks to build grudge and grievance. It seeks to build political power, build a political movement, come to political power based on nurturing real or imagined grudge and grievance. And of course, as I pointed out last week, if and when their brigadoon turned sour, as sour it would, for reasons I'll go on to explain, can you just imagine the grudge and grievance that would be the result? And can you imagine against whom that grudge and grievance would be leveraged? So we intend to make the case for Britain. And it's this. We have been together for more than 300 years. Scotland is not a colony of Britain. Britain came into being when first in the Union of Crowns in the early 17th century and then the Union of the Parliaments in the early 18th century. Britain came into being as a result of a union between Scotland and England. We're not a colony, but we did help colonize much of the world. The painting of Scotland as somehow an occupied country, a country which is somehow put upon, held against its will, is entirely false. First of all, Scotland could have left this union any time in the democratic era, almost 100 years of universal suffrage, and decided not to do so. And decided not to do so as recently as 2014. Now that's not ancient history either. It isn't the case that Scotland is especially oppressed as a part of Britain. The opposite is true. The opposite is true. Scotland receives more from the public purse than any other part of the United Kingdom. That's not history, that's economics. It's fact. It cannot be gainsaid. Scotland is not bereft of political power and influence in the state. Obviously, we have 11% of the seats in the Parliament. If an independent Scotland joined the European Parliament, it would have something like 0.4% of the seats in the Parliament, and in that case, it would be a European Parliament, which is merely a rubber stamp assembly and has no actual power at all. We always have leading Scots in the government. Michael Gove, for example, is a very powerful man in the British government. There is always a Secretary of State for Scotland in the government. And I sat in Parliament as a Labour member of Parliament when actually almost the entire government was Scottish. Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Darling, Donald Dewar, I could go, George Robertson, I could go on, believe me. It wasn't a great government, I've got to tell you. And it actually caused all of Britain and much of the world a great many problems. But it was a Scottish government, which makes a point, I think. The fact that Scots are governing you does not mean necessarily that you will be better governed. But in any case, you can switch on the radio in the morning and switch off the radio in the evening. You can watch the television all day. You can read the public prints all day, and they will be full of the journalism and broadcasting of prominent Scottish people in Britain. Andrew Neil is perhaps the best example. And now that he's out of work, I'm very much hoping, Andrew, if you're watching this, that you'll join the Alliance for Unity, maybe even be a candidate. We'll make way for you. You can be the lead candidate in one of the constituencies. It's simply not true that Scotland are the poor relations in Britain. Trust me, I've represented places that are much, much poorer than Scotland. There are many problems in Scotland. Problems of economics, problems of society, problems in families, but they are not because you're Scottish. They are because of the political and economic system which exists everywhere, or most places anyway, in the world. Scotland is not singled out for bad treatment, quite the opposite, in fact. So we will try to make the case that a small island of English-speaking people would be very foolish to break up. Millions of us have lived and worked in England. Millions of us still do. Millions of us have married people from England, or English people have married us. We have in-laws that are English. We take joy in the achievements of people in England, don't we? At least when I watched Liverpool lift the Premier League championships this week and become champions of England, of Europe, and of the world, I felt proud of them, didn't you? Did you feel they were foreigners that you were watching? Did you think that the people of Anfield, the people of the great city of Liverpool, were somehow foreign to you? I never did, and I never will. I was in Newcastle the other day, and I didn't think for one moment that I was in a foreign country, that I was amongst foreigners. 60% of Scottish exports don't go to Slovenia or Slovakia or Germany. 60%, 63 in fact, 63% of our exports go to England. We have a single market of 67 million people. A single market with absolute freedom of movement. We can go and live, and they can come and live in Scotland or in England. We can trade there. We can work there. We can study there. They can study here, and so on. We have a good island, free of significant political extremism, free of significant rancor and hate amongst the people. I lived in England for decades and not only never experienced any prejudice against me as a Scot, but quite the opposite. Scots are not just welcomed, but treasured in the rest of the United Kingdom, because we're quite good at what we do and people will elect us to Parliament in their cities, in their country. People will be happy to see us in the media and read us in the public prints that I spoke of earlier. We, above all, have each other to rely on. And Scotland has relied on the national exchequer in Britain twice in the last 12 years, without which we would have been absolutely devastated. We would have been sunk. And I refer, of course, to the financial crash of 2008 and the coronavirus crisis of 2020 that we are still living through. An independent Scotland, without its own currency, and I'll come to that in a minute, could not possibly have kept 1 million workers on furlough at the level that they have been kept on. That's only possible because we're a big economy. That's only possible because we have one big exchequer. And that exchequer has been ploughing an extraordinary amount of money into the Scottish economy to keep it afloat. Ditto when the banks crashed. Crash started in Scotland, by the way. If the English people had said, well, hell, mend you, sort your own mess out, we would have been in very real trouble indeed. Trouble we were in, of course. We've had more than a decade of austerity. But if you want to talk about austerity, let me turn to the austerity we'd be facing if the SNP got their way. If they were to succeed in separating our country, it would have no currency. It is dedicated to joining the European Union. And the European Union has conditions for people using the euro. And those conditions are very stringent indeed. First of all, you can only join the European Union, join the euro, if you have your own currency. Sterlingization, i.e. continuing to use the pound issued and underwritten by the Bank of England, is not your own currency. You can't borrow at the same rates. You cannot expect any central bank to stand behind you. If you create a central bank, it'll take you many years and 60 billion pounds to create your central bank. And so if sterlingization is now the route that the Scottish nationalists are taking us down, then the independent Scotland would have to join the euro, but only when it could satisfy the criteria for joining the euro, which are extremely stringent. The most significant of which, the only one I'll mention now, is that your deficit must be less than 3%. Scotland's deficit is 8.4%. 8.4 as opposed to 3% or less. In order to satisfy that criterion, Scotland's economy would literally have to be reduced almost to a Stone Age level. The public sector would have to be effectively closed down. How else are you going to save 5.4% of your national product in order to satisfy the entry criterion for the euro? Can you imagine how many hundreds of thousands of jobs that would lose? Can you imagine the public services that would have to be literally destroyed in order to meet that criterion? Now, good luck trying to sell that to the Scottish people. I don't think you will be successful. I don't believe that there will even be, I don't believe that the nationalists could win an Indy 2 on the prospectus that they are putting forward of joining the European Union, leaving the British single market, erecting a hard border between Scotland and England, where 63% of our exports go. I hear some of them shrieking now, there'll be no hard border. Well, actually, there's a hard border now, and it's comprised of screaming vigilante lunatics, screaming at English tourists not to come here and spend our money in this devastated economic situation we are in as a result of the coronavirus. But there'll have to be a real border there, of course, because Scotland will have free movement of East European labour and the rest of Britain will not. And how else can you stop the cheap European labour coming to Scotland and then catching the stagecoach to England? How else could you stop that except by a hard border? So good luck trying to persuade the Scots who for 3 centuries have freely crossed the administrative border and whose goods and services, mainly 63%, flow across that border into the rest of Britain. So you may say, if I don't believe they will succeed, and I don't even believe that there will be an Indy 2 anytime soon or remotely soon, why are you bothering? Well, here's the reason. Because if we don't get the SNP out in May, we will be talking about Indy 2 and talking about separatism every day of our lives for the foreseeable future. Every public pronouncement made by the SNP is made with the intention of maximizing grudge and grievance, building a majority one day for the destruction of Britain and the separatism of Scotland. So there will be no improvement in our schools, which were once world famous, something to be proud of, because nobody's paying attention to the schools. Evidently, all they're doing is trying to get their ducks in a row to have another go. Don't you see? Nobody will be paying attention to the health service, the care home sector. Nobody will be paying attention to fisheries and farming and tourism because they're not important for the SNP. All that's important for the SNP from 1934 until now was breaking up Britain. And they were even prepared to do it while London, Liverpool, and Clydebank, for that matter, were burning. So why would they balk at continuing to do so now? It means that we'll speak, think, argue, and fight about nothing else. You see, the Alliance for Unity contains people of the left, right, and centre. I have nothing in common, nothing significantly in common with people on the right of politics in Scotland, except one thing. Neither they nor I want to see the country broken up because we love it. We love Britain and we love Scotland. And we don't want to plunge Scotland into this cesspool of separatism because we think that being together with the rest of Britain is far, far better for us and far, far better for them. Now, I don't know about you. I've moved back to Scotland. I'll die here. I don't want to spend the rest of my life arguing about the Constitution, arguing about separatism. I want to argue, and hear arguing, about which kind of Scotland we want. What do we want to do in our schools to make them better? How do we want to improve our health service, our policing, our public transport, our fisheries, our farming, our tourism? How are we going to make our country better? That's what I want to talk about and hear others talk about. But if Nicola Sturgeon gets back in next May, none of that will be remotely important to them. All we'll be doing is living this never-ending that we've been living since they refused to accept the result of the referendum in 2014, despite signing their own names on a document that they would accept the result. They have never accepted it, despite promising us that it would be a once-in-a-generation, sometimes even a once-in-a-lifetime experience. They never accepted it, and they never will accept it. And if we had another referendum and we defeated them again, they still wouldn't accept it. They only exist in order to bring about the breakup of this country. And I think enough is enough. I think we need to get off this hamster wheel. So finally, how is it to be done? There's a lot of confusion, some of it deliberately now, today at least, being engendered by the people who feel threatened by our dramatic growth and our sudden emergence on the political scene. Look, it isn't rocket science. Our plan has an A and a B to it. Here's the A: that the best placed unionist candidate should run in the constituencies, and no other unionist party should oppose them. That's not rocket science, is it? What's the point of the Tories and the Liberal Democrats standing against Nicola Sturgeon in her constituency? Why not leave that to the best placed unionist candidate, the Labour candidate, and transfer that across the country? If there was only one unionist candidate against one nationalist candidate, we'd have a better chance of seizing SNP constituency seats, wouldn't we? Isn't that obvious? But you'd be amazed at some of the arguments that are emerging from people who don't want to stand down. I spoke yesterday to a very senior Conservative. I won't break the confidentiality by naming them. Almost couldn't get more senior. And they made the point to me that, of course, in politics, there's always a sense of disappointment amongst candidates at being asked to stand down in favor of the greater cause. Well, tough luck. You see, if it could work, what you've been doing over the last 13 years, it would have already worked. That's my point. If you keep doing what you're doing, you'll get the same result. And the same result means the SNP in power, in perpetuity. Imagine that voice, that face, in perpetuity. It's like something out of Orwell's Big Brother. They do all this on a minority of the vote. More people, far more people vote against them than vote for them. But because we are split into three, at least three, then they get in on a minority of the vote and they get the lion's share of the seats. So, part A of our plan is the best placed unionist candidate gets a free run in the constituency. And the B part is again not rocket science. If everyone votes for the Alliance for Unity on the lists, and those lists are being carefully chosen to have Conservatives, Liberals and Labour people on them, then we're home and dry. The first people who will be out are the Greens, the gardening section of the SNP. They'll be obliterated if a big proportion of pro-unity voters chose us, because the Alliance relies upon that kind of unity, and the Greens depend on that kind of disunity. They only get in because people waste their vote on the lists by voting for parties that cannot get a significant number of candidates elected from the lists because of the electoral system that we have. So our number one goal isn't actually defeating the SNP. They've only got 3 MSPs off the list. We hope to take them, of course. And that would be them 3 down and us 3 up. But if we could take out the gardening section, if we could remove the 6 Greens from the Parliament, that's 6 down and us 6 up. Do the maths. The SNP could not govern, even if that's all we achieved. If we removed the Greens from the Holyrood Parliament, the SNP majority is gone. And if there was unity in the constituencies, the pro-union parties would significantly increase their numbers of MSPs. So it's a win-win for everybody. And if you don't believe that, just look and listen at the churning of teeth on the nationalist side about us. If we were somehow a threat to the union by dividing the vote, why are the nationalists going nuts about us? Why are they applying to be candidates so they can later unmask us? Why are they setting up fake Twitter accounts? Why are they libeling us, slandering us? Why are they crying their bitter tears of anger about the Alliance for Unity? It's obvious. It's because they know that if this plan works, they are out. And we'll have a government of national unity. We'll sit as independents and we'll vote left, vote right, vote centre on domestic matters. We'll be united only on one thing, that we will do nothing that will endanger the continuing existence of Britain, the continuing union with the rest of Britain. And I think that's not a bad offer. I really do. I can't see why anyone would object to that, anyone that wanted Britain to remain together. Why would anyone object to that? And we'll get a government of national unity. It might be a good government, it might not, but it would be better than the government we've got now. A government of cataclysmic failure across everything they touch turns to dust. It would be better than what we've got now. Charlotte Morley would be a better Justice Secretary than Hamza Yusuf, don't you think? We would be a better administration than them. But how much better will depend on how the chips fall. Whether I'm the First Minister or Jackson Carlaw is the First Minister, to put it jocularly. How much better remains to be seen. But one thing will be so much better as to be almost incalculable. It will be the end of the never-ending. The union will never be threatened again. And if we get a better Britain, there's absolutely no reason why that threat should ever emerge again. Now, if you want to find out more about standing for a candidate application pack, email us at contact@allianceforunity.uk, or you can visit the website now, www.allianceforunity.uk, or you can ring us on 01389 504 534. And no obscene phone calls, please. I've already had a visit from the police today about Mr. David Llewellyn, and I think I can safely say that his collar will soon be felt. Thanks very much for listening. I'm sorry I went on 4 minutes longer than I intended, and I look forward to responding on our Twitter feed, Alliance for Unity, after this meeting. Thank you and good night.